Hi there, my name is Shannon, and I'm Willamette Week's Music and Visual Arts Editor. Here today with Noah Greenwald from the Center of Biological Diversity, which is one of 7 conservation groups currently suing the Oregon Department of Forestry for post-fire logging practices in the Santiam Forest. Noah, how's it going today?
Good, good. Thanks, Shannon.
So to start off, what's going on in the Santiam that this lawsuit is hoping to at least halt?
Sure. So, as you know, Oregonians well know, there was a series of fires last September, including the Beachy Creek fire, and those fires affected what is called the Santiam State Forest, which is in the Cascades. And according to the Oregon Department of Forestry, roughly 16,000 acres burned. One sort of finer point about that, though, is that fires are a mosaic. So some areas will burn quite hot and all the trees will be killed. Some areas will burn just a bit and most of the trees will survive. And that's very much true for the Santiam State Forest. It was a mosaic. And so the Oregon Department of Forestry is proposing, actually already is, logging some of those areas in order to recover the wood. We're not there. Of those 16,000 acres, they're proposing to log roughly 3,000 acres. We're not objecting to logging in all of those acres. Under their forest management plan, they designated areas as being targeted for developing complex forest characteristics, which is another way of saying old forest characteristics, bigger trees, multi-storied canopy, a mix of live and dead trees. Those are all the things that make up complex forests. They also are in the process of developing a habitat conservation plan to protect endangered species like the northern spotted owl. And they've proposed some areas of the Santiam State Forest as habitat conservation areas. And in both those cases, we're objecting to logging in areas that they targeted for developing complex forests and areas that they've proposed as habitat conservation areas, which amounts to roughly a third of the 3,000 acres that they're proposing. And from our perspective, the science is clear that going in and clear cutting these areas will not help them develop habitat for salmon. It will not help them develop habitat for spotted owls. In fact, it'll retard the ability of those forests to recover and meet habitat goals and meet the goal of being complex forests. And so we just feel like what Oregon Department of Forestry is proposing is fundamentally inconsistent with their own management plans, and we've gone to state court to challenge them.
So a lot of these areas are currently closed to the public, so a lot of us just don't even know what it looks like down there. Have you personally been able to go and sort of survey the area firsthand?
No, I haven't been able to go, but I do know that my colleagues at Cascadia Wildlands, that they've been able to fly over some of the areas with the drone. And they definitely saw a lot of green trees, a lot of live trees in areas that are being proposed for clear cutting, which is, again, unfortunate. But it's important to recognize that dead trees, as well as live trees, have a lot of benefit for wildlife and for fish in particular. One of the things that salmon have suffered from in Oregon is the loss of large woody debris in streams. And so a lot of those dead trees would eventually end up in streams and would help provide habitat for salmon, but not if they're clear cut.
So is the ultimate hope just more public oversight and accountability for ODF, or do we also need to be fundamentally rethinking how we view the role of forests and fire and how logging plays into all that?
I would say both. I mean, I think accountability is important, and that's been missing from the Oregon Department of Forestry. And I think we've seen that in the, the series produced by OPB and the Oregonian called Failing Forestry, which I'd encourage people to read. But I think also it is time to rethink, particularly with state forests, whether they play whether there's a bigger role for them in addressing climate change. I think there's been increasing science coming out of Oregon State University that shows that the timber industry is one of the biggest emitters of greenhouse gas emissions in the state. And I think it's underappreciated that land clearance, including logging, is a major factor in global warming, in addition to fossil fuel burning. I think people recognize that, we have to leave the Amazon in place in order to protect our climate. But I think there's also a growing awareness that Oregon, particularly Western Oregon, which is quite wet, is an excellent place to store more carbon, and that logging those forests will release that carbon, and will release carbon that would be stored in soils in particular. So it is time to rethink how we manage our forests. And, I think it's, economically, there's even whole other issues there of, relying on timber receipts for government services in many cases has proven quite unstable and hasn't been a good way to manage communities.
All right. Well, those are all of my questions, unless you have anything that you want to add or ask or clarify.
I guess the one thing I would add is, scientists from around the world are raising the alarm bells that we're in an extinction crisis, and that has serious consequences for future generations. And habitat destruction has long been the biggest cause of extinction, including logging. So that's another part of this puzzle, is that we need to protect more of nature if we're going to both address climate and extinction. And I think these are things that Oregonians care about, and I think Oregon Department of Forestry is out of step with the science and out of step with public values. And this lawsuit we've brought is just one small part of that.